Unwanted single mom. I heard every word, sharp as glass, cutting through the wedding hall. My sister Charlotte stood on the stage, microphone in hand, her white dress glittering under the chandeliers. Her smile was cruel, calculated, and it sliced me open more than any knife ever could. A ripple of laughter spread across the crowd. Phones lifted in the air, live streaming my humiliation for anyone to see. I sat frozen at the very back, near the kitchen doors where the smell of roasted meat mixed with cheap perfume. My fingers clenched the stem of my wine glass until my knuckles turned white. My lips trembled, but not from fear. Eyes darted toward me, whispers flew from table to table. In that moment, I was no longer a guest, no longer a sister. I was a spectacle, a joke. My name is Melissa Carter. I am 35 years old. And that was the moment my own sister turned me into the punchline of her perfect wedding day. If you were called that, in front of hundreds of strangers, would you stay silent or would you rise? Before I tell you how her wedding unraveled into the greatest scandal of our family, leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more revenge stories that will make you rethink what family really means. They thought I would bow my head, but that day, I rewrote the script forever. When I was a child, my house was built on favoritism. My sister Charlotte was the golden one, the little princess who could do no wrong. My mother called her that so often it felt like her name had been legally changed. Where is my princess? How's my princess? Doing those words filled the air like perfume, cloying and constant. And me? I wasn't Melissa. I wasn't even myself. I was the older one, the reminder, the caretaker, the sacrifice. Melissa, you're the big sister. You need to set an example. Melissa, you're the big sister. You need to give things up. Melissa, you're the big sister. You need to be stronger. That word sacrifice became my inheritance. I can still see the scene as if it happened yesterday. I was 9, holding a certificate that said, Student of the Month, in bright red letters. I'd worked myself into exhaustion for it, reading under the covers with a flashlight, memorizing math problems until numbers swam before my eyes. I burst into the kitchen, beaming, holding the paper out like a prize. But my mother barely looked. She was crouched before Charlotte, adjusting the ruffles on a pastel dress, smoothing her hair with soft hands. Look at my princess, she cooed. Doesn't she look just like a doll? I stood there in silence, the certificate trembling in my hand, then slipping to the counter, landing beneath a pile of grocery coupons. That was my childhood in miniature. My achievements vanishing into silence. Charlotte's smallest steps applauded like a parade. It never stopped. At birthdays, she got the first slice of cake, the bigger presents, the attention of every relative. At holidays, I scrubbed dishes while she painted her nails. Every dinner tilted toward her stories, her drama, her needs. My mother's voice was a constant refrain in my head. Melissa, you're the older one. You should know better. By the time I was 16, I had been trained to believe that my worth was measured by how much of myself I erased. And yet I had dreams. I wanted college. I wanted the chance to leave our small town and breathe. I imagined myself on a campus, walking between libraries, staying up all night writing essays, surrounded by people who didn't know me as the shadow of a princess. I could almost feel it, like a life within reach. But reality is cruel. One night my mother sat me down, bills spread across her lap, her face tight with worry. Charlotte lounged nearby, legs tucked under her, flipping through a fashion magazine. Melissa, my mother said flatly, we can't afford to send both of you to school. You're older, you're stronger. Charlotte still has so much potential. She deserves her chance. My throat tightened. But I've worked for this. I've earned. She cut me off before I could finish. You'll get your chance later. Right now your sister comes first. You can help by working. It's only fair. That word again? Fair. It bent like rust in my ears. That summer, while my classmates packed for dorm rooms and decorated notebooks, I packed uniforms for the night shift at a diner. I learned how to carry 3 trays balanced on tired arms, how to smile when men snapped their fingers, how to keep walking when my feet burned. At the end of the week, I handed my paycheck to my mother. She slid it into an envelope labeled, Charlotte's tuition. Charlotte didn't ask where the money came from. Maybe she knew. Maybe she didn't care. She waved her acceptance letter in the air, squealing, I got in! Before hugging our mother tight. When the tuition bill arrived, she chirped, Thanks, Mom, and ran upstairs to call her friends. She never once looked at me. I remember one particular night after a week of consecutive shifts. My hands smelled like grease and coffee. My skin was raw from hot water and soap. I handed my mother a crumpled envelope of cash. She counted it quickly, nodded, and said, Good, that should cover Charlotte's books. I wanted to scream, It's not books, it's my life. But the words never left my mouth. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, long after they went to bed, staring at glossy college brochures I'd hidden away. I traced the smiling faces of students on the lawn with my finger as if I could touch that other world. But I couldn't. Those brochures became ghosts. And so did I. Ghosts don't go to college. Ghosts disappear into the background. And I became the ghost in my own family, the one who worked, who paid, who kept quiet, while the princess shone in the spotlight. I told myself it was worth it. That one day Charlotte would look at me and finally say, Thank you. Thank you for what you gave up. That day never came. Instead, years blurred. Me in uniforms, handing over envelopes, her in dresses, hugging our mother, surrounded by friends who told her how lucky she was. I was the ghost funding the golden girl. If you gave up your entire future to put your sibling through school, only to be brushed aside like an afterthought, how would you feel? Would you still smile for them? Would you keep swallowing the bitterness, pretending it didn't exist? Or would it burn through your veins until it hollowed you out? I thought sacrifice would make me unforgettable. That love, poured out freely, would bind her to me forever. But it didn't. It only made me invisible. I thought giving up my future would carve me into her memory, but all it did was erase me. I thought sacrifice would make me strong, but it only turned me into her shadow, and shadows are always left behind. I thought by sin sacrifice would buy me gratitude, but in reality, it only taught her how easy it was to take from me. I thought she would see me. She never did. I thought she would thank me. She never cared. I thought being her sister would mean something, but it meant nothing at all. I thought giving her everything would earn me a place in her heart, but it only hollowed me out. I thought my sacrifices would make me loved, but the truth was simpler and sharper. They didn't make me loved. They didn't even make me remembered. They just made me her shadow. And shadows don't get gratitude. They fade. I married young, too young, because I thought happiness could be built quickly if I just tried hard enough. I wanted a family of my own, something different from the cold favoritism I had grown up with. His name was David. He wasn't perfect, but he looked at me like I was someone, not a shadow. For a while I convinced myself that was enough. We had a son, Ethan, and for 2 years I believed maybe life had finally given me something of my own to hold. Then one morning David packed a bag and left. No warning, no fight, no final explanation. Just the sound of the door slamming while Ethan slept in his crib. I stood there, frozen, a bottle half washed in my hand, the soapy water going cold. My husband didn't even leave a note. I became a single mother at 25. The label stuck to me like glue. Suddenly every neighbor had something to say. In the grocery store aisles, in hushed tones on front porches, poor thing, her husband left. She couldn't keep him, a mother at her age, raising a child alone. What a failure. I would hear the word failure whispered behind my back until it became a soundtrack to my life. The nights were the hardest. Ethan would fall asleep in my arms after hours of crying, and I'd hold him against me as though my heartbeat could fill the silence David had left behind. One night in particular stays with me. I rocked Ethan in the worn armchair by the window, his small body finally limp with sleep. Outside, I heard the neighbors talking, their voices slicing through the thin walls. She's a single mom now. Such a shame. A failed wife, a failed woman. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood, rocking Ethan, as though if I stopped, the world would stop too. I whispered, You are not a mistake. You are not a failure. You are the only thing I've done right. Working and raising him nearly killed me. I took shifts at the diner, shifts at the gas station, cleaning jobs on weekends. My feet blistered, my back ached, but Ethan had to eat. Bills piled up like cliffs, and every time I thought I'd climbed one, another rose in front of me. I would count crumpled bills on the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, whispering numbers like prayers, praying they would stretch far enough to cover formula, rent, and electricity. Some weeks they didn't. Some nights I would skip dinner just so Ethan had enough. Still, despite all the exhaustion, Ethan was the anchor that kept me alive. His laugh, small and bright, had the power to cut through the fatigue that smothered me. He'd crawl into my lap, sticky-fingered and smiling, and for a moment the whispers of failure disappeared. But children are perceptive. They see more than we think. One evening when Ethan was 6, after a long day of school for him and a longer shift for me, I tucked him into bed. His small voice broke the quiet. "Mom, why doesn't Aunt Charlotte like you?" The question pierced me. I froze, the storybook slipping from my hands. He looked at me with wide eyes, innocent, expecting an answer I couldn't give. My throat tightened. I forced a smile. "Aunt Charlotte is just different from me." He nodded, sleepy, and curled into his pillow. But I lay awake for hours after, replaying his words like a wound I couldn't stop pressing. Even my child could see it. The disdain, the distance. Charlotte was thriving. She posted photos of herself at parties, on vacations, in new clothes, surrounded by friends and admirers. At family gatherings she would boast, "I've worked so hard for this. I made it all happen because Mom believed in me." She would say it with pride, chin high, basking in attention. And not once did she acknowledge the envelopes I had slid across the kitchen table years earlier. The nights I bled into my shoes at the diner so she could buy textbooks. To her, her success was entirely her own. I was erased from her story, deleted from her memory. At holidays, Charlotte would hand out glossy cards with her smiling face on them, announcing promotions, achievements, accolades. She'd stand tall, glass of champagne in hand, and say, "I couldn't have done it without Mom's support." The room would applaud, my mother would beam, and I would sit at the edge of the table, Ethan's small hand in mine, invisible again. One Thanksgiving, Charlotte announced she'd been invited to speak at a business panel. "They see me as such a role model," she said, laughing, the word princess practically glowing in the air. My mother clapped like Charlotte had been crowned queen. I swallowed down bitterness with dry turkey. Ethan squeezed my hand and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Mom." I almost cried at the table. He was the only one who saw me. Life as a single mother was relentless. There were nights when I sat in the dark after Ethan fell asleep, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was all I would ever be. The forgotten sister, the abandoned wife, the struggling mother. My dreams of college were long gone, and even though I sometimes looked at brochures online, they felt like relics of another life. My reality was paychecks that never stretched far enough, aching bones, and a family that only remembered me when they needed someone to babysit, to cook, to clean. And through it all, Charlotte soared. She became the star, the one everyone talked about, the one my mother bragged about at church, at the grocery store, to strangers on the street. "Charlotte is doing so well. She's so successful. She's everything I ever hoped for." I was never mentioned, or if I was, it was with pity, whispered like a curse. Melissa had it rough. Melissa is a single mom. Poor Melissa. But I wasn't poor. I wasn't a failure. I was surviving. I was keeping my son alive, giving him what little I could. Still, that didn't erase the bitterness. It didn't erase the truth that my sacrifices had been rewritten into someone else's triumph. Every family gathering became a stage where Charlotte shone and I was a prop. Every achievement of hers was attributed to my mother's support. Every struggle of mine was brushed aside as personal weakness. And Ethan, my sweet boy, was the only one who ever reminded me that I was more than the label they had given me. I thought the unfairness would end after childhood. I thought once we grew up, once we built lives of our own, the balance would shift. That maybe, just maybe, I'd be seen for who I was. But I was wrong. The truth was crueler. The unfairness hadn't ended with childhood. It hadn't been buried in the past. It was only beginning. I thought injustice was behind me, but the truth was clear, sharp, undeniable. It was still alive. It was growing, and I was about to face the cruelest chapter of all. I thought the unfairness ended in childhood. But no, it had only just begun. Charlotte's wedding wasn't just an event. It was an empire she built from the moment she slipped the ring onto her finger. Every conversation, every family gathering, every social media post revolved around her upcoming day. She told anyone who would listen that it would be the wedding of the year. She said it like she was curating an exhibition for the whole world, and in a way, she was. I wasn't her guest. I wasn't her sister. I was one of her props, one of her stagehands, and I realized that long before the invitations went out. She called me late one evening, her voice the same blend of syrup and command I had grown up with. "Melissa," she said, "I need you to help with the wedding. Just a few little things, nothing too heavy." Her words landed like an assignment, not a request. Just a few little things became an endless list. I was in charge of keeping her friends' children occupied so they wouldn't ruin her photos, organizing table settings, checking vendor deliveries, and even making sure the florist arrived on time. It was unpaid labor dressed up as family duty. When I hesitated, she reminded me, "You're so good at managing chaos. And anyway, you're not really going to be in the spotlight, are you? This is my day. My day." She said it often, as though ownership of time itself had been signed over to her. The email came a week later. Attached was the seating chart. My eyes scanned the grid of names until they stopped on mine. Melissa Carter. Pushed to the far corner, last table, next to the swinging kitchen doors, where the smell of steam and grease would cling to my dress. Everyone else had places of honor, college friends near the dance floor, bridesmaids and groomsmen close to the head table, even distant cousins with prime views. I was shoved to the margin, my existence scribbled in as an afterthought, a shadow assigned to the dark edge of her perfect tableau. I sat staring at the screen, my stomach tightening. She could have at least pretended to include me, could have hidden her contempt beneath a polite arrangement. But no. She wanted me to see exactly where I belonged. Then came the part that stung worse than the table assignment. She told me not to bring Ethan. She didn't wrap it in politeness. She didn't even try. Her exact words. "Melissa, I think it's better if Ethan stays home. Children don't really fit the atmosphere I'm going for. This is going to be elegant, sophisticated. You understand." What she meant was, "Your son is messy. Your son doesn't fit the picture. Keep him out of sight the way you've learned to keep yourself hidden." I sat there with the phone warm against my ear, looking at Ethan playing with toy cars on the rug. He laughed, a sound that carried across the room, pure and unaware. How could I explain to a 6-year-old that his own aunt thought he was a stain on her perfect day? How could I tell him that his place in her life was as invisible as mine? I swallowed the words and said nothing, and that silence tasted like poison. The weeks before the wedding became a series of demands. Charlotte's voice filled my phone daily. "Melissa, can you double-check the table linens? Melissa, can you call the photographer? Melissa, I need someone to pick up the candles for the reception." She didn't ask if I was free, if I could afford to take time off work, if Ethan would be okay without me home. She didn't care. All that mattered was her show. She treated me like a personal assistant she didn't have to pay, and I allowed it because refusing would only feed her narrative that I was bitter, that I couldn't be happy for her. Then there was Claire, our cousin, the girl I had once carried through her own storms. She had borrowed money from me years ago to keep herself afloat, crying on my couch and swearing she'd never forget what I'd done for her. I had slipped her cash, no questions asked, because that's what I did. I carried people, even when I was drowning myself. At the bridal fitting, she looked through me like I was air. Later that night, while I was arranging place cards, she leaned in with a smirk. "So Mel, still single? Must get lonely. Don't you ever get tired of being on your own?" She laughed before I could respond, tossing her hair like it was the funniest joke. My hands tightened around the cards, the ink blurring beneath my grip. I wanted to remind her of the night she had sobbed in my apartment, of the money that had come out of my own rent, of the way I had lifted her when she was at her lowest. But I didn't. I swallowed the fury, the humiliation searing my throat, and gave her a brittle smile. That's how humiliation works. It makes you complicit in your own erasure. The rehearsal dinner was another blow. The seating chart had been printed on a glossy board at the entrance. I walked up and scanned it, and there was my name again, shoved to the corner by the kitchen. My fingers brushed over the ink, and for a moment, I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of a life I'd once thought was mine too. Guests mingled, laughter rising around me, and I felt the invisible wall pushing me further out. On the day of the wedding, I arrived early as instructed, dressed simply, careful not to draw attention. They handed me a clipboard and pointed me toward the children's corner. My tasks were clear. Keep them quiet, keep them fed, keep them out of sight. I bent down to tie shoelaces, handed out coloring books, wiped chocolate off little faces. From my station I could see Charlotte posing, head tilted just right, her bridesmaids fluttering around her like moths. She shone in the light she had claimed since birth, every camera lens tilted toward her, every smile reserved for her. Hours dragged. The ceremony began, and I slipped into my seat at the back, the wobbling table rocking under my hand. The smell of roasted meat drifted from the kitchen, heavy and sour. From where I sat, I could barely see the altar, just the shimmer of Charlotte's gown and the faint echo of applause. I stared into my wine glass, watching condensation drip, and wondered if anyone would notice if I vanished altogether. Would they even pause? Would anyone say my name? Claire caught my eye across the room, her smirk sharp. She leaned toward another guest, whispered, and they both laughed. My face burned. I turned away, shame crawling up my neck. That was betrayal's true sting. It didn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it came from the very people whose weight you had carried on your back. Tell me, if someone who once owed you everything turned their back and mocked you instead, what would you do? Would you smile and let it slide? Would you pretend the knife in your back wasn't twisting? Or would you sit there counting every debt, every kindness, and wonder how quickly people forget? Dinner was served, and I was nothing but a shadow. Conversations flowed like rivers around me, never once touching my shores. Glasses clinked, laughter rose, and I picked at cold chicken while silence pressed against me. Ethan's absence gnawed at me. His chair at home sat empty, his small hand not in mine. He would never know how cruelly he had been erased from this night. I thought of his question, "Mom, why doesn't Aunt Charlotte like you?" I had no answer then, and I had no answer now. The truth settled like lead in my chest. I had sacrificed my youth, my college years, my sleep, my health, for this family. I had handed over my future in envelopes of cash, worked myself raw to fund Charlotte's education, and here I was, banished to the back, erased from the story, treated like a ghost. My whole life I had been pushed aside, told to sacrifice, told to endure, and here I was, enduring still. But as I sat at that wobbling table by the kitchen, I felt something shift inside me. It was small, a flicker at first, a whisper that I didn't have to accept this role anymore, that I could choose something else, that maybe, just maybe, this night wasn't going to end the way Charlotte thought it would. I thought the cruelty had peaked, that humiliation had cut as deep as it could. But I was wrong. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. I didn't know how sharp the blade would be when it finally landed. I didn't know that humiliation wasn't finished with me yet. I didn't know that the sharpest cut was still coming. I thought the injustice ended in childhood, but I was wrong. So very wrong. I didn't know it then, but I was about to find out just how deep their cruelty could go. I didn't know how much more shame was waiting for me. I didn't know that the worst humiliation hadn't even begun. I thought I had seen the limits of their contempt, but I hadn't. And that night I would learn. I didn't know then, but I do now. I thought injustice had ended with childhood, but no, it was only beginning. I didn't know how much more was coming, but I would learn, and I would never forget. I didn't know how much deeper it could cut, but I would find out soon. I thought I was done being humiliated, but I wasn't. The night had only just begun. The reception was a kingdom Charlotte built for herself, dripping in flowers and candles, a stage set for her coronation. The chandeliers above glowed golden. The tables gleamed with white linen, crystal glasses catching the light. The music was polished, the band tucked neatly into the corner playing a cheerful tune. The guests leaned back in their chairs with wine glasses in hand, their laughter filling the room in waves. I sat in the back, tucked into the very last table beside the kitchen doors. Every time a server swung through with trays of steaming food, the smell of grease and roasted meat rolled over me, clinging to my dress. My table wobbled when I leaned against it, the leg uneven on the polished floor. I wasn't a guest. I was an afterthought. The MC tapped the microphone, and the chatter died down. Ladies and gentlemen, our bride would like to say a few words. Applause rose, and Charlotte stood with the grace of someone who had practiced in the mirror. She smoothed the bodice of her gown, her diamond earrings glinting in the light, her smile wide and glowing. Her hand rested briefly on Daniel's shoulder, claiming him like another jewel in her collection. She lifted the microphone, her eyes shining. Her voice carried smoothly, trained, practiced. She thanked the guests for coming, thanked Daniel for his love, thanked the vendors for their hard work. She praised our mother for being her guiding star, tears shimmering as she spoke of maternal sacrifice. The crowd cooed and clapped at all the right moments. For a second, it felt like she might end there, neat and pretty. But Charlotte never knew when to stop. Her smile shifted, sharpened. "I've always been lucky," she said, pausing for effect. "I've always known I was meant for more. Not everyone is so fortunate. Some people make poor choices, get stuck, let life pass them by. But not me. I refuse to let that happen. I refuse to become an unwanted single mom." The words dropped into the hall like a stone into still water, sending ripples of silence that broke into laughter. First a few chuckles, nervous, testing the air. Then louder, freer, crueler. People covered their mouths, leaned toward their neighbors, shook their heads with grins. The sound swelled until it filled the hall, echoing against the high ceilings. My ears rang, my chest squeezed tight. I sat frozen, my hand clenched around the stem of my glass. The wine trembled, the crystal rattling faintly in my grip. My face burned, my skin prickled, as if every eye in the room had turned toward me. And some had. I saw them glancing back, quick flicks of the eyes, searching for my reaction, eager to see if the target had noticed the arrow lodged in her chest. Charlotte didn't look away. She stared directly at me across the room, her smile wide and glittering, her eyes hard. She wanted me to feel every inch of it. She wanted me to wear it like a brand. She was claiming victory not just over her new husband, not just over her guests, but over me. The MC chuckled weakly, pretending not to hear. The band played softly on as though nothing had happened. No one corrected her. No one intervened. It was easier to laugh, easier to sip champagne, easier to act like cruelty was just part of the entertainment. Heat rushed through me, rising into my face, burning in my throat. I wanted to shrink into my chair, vanish into the floor, but the humiliation was so sharp it cut past shame and brushed against anger. And then Claire, my cousin, raised her voice. Her tone was bright, artificial, carrying just enough for others to hear. "Oh, come on, Mel," she said with a grin. "It's just a joke. Don't take it so seriously." Her laughter rang out high and brittle, and a few more guests joined in, relieved, emboldened. And just like that, the knife twisted. Because it wasn't just Charlotte anymore. It was Claire too. The girl I had once lifted with my own money when she couldn't breathe under debt. The girl who had sobbed into my shoulder, swearing she would never forget. Now she was laughing with them, laughing at me. Do you know that moment when the room expects you to laugh at your own destruction? When silence would mark you as bitter, humorless, a problem? That was the trap Claire laid for me. Smile, Melissa. Smile so you don't ruin the party. Smile so they can all keep laughing. Smile so they can say you're in on the joke. My lips obeyed. They stretched into the weakest, most broken smile I'd ever worn. My teeth ached from the pressure, my jaw locked as I tilted my head slightly, pretending it didn't hurt. The crowd relaxed, satisfied. The laughter rolled on, and the conversation moved forward. The wound remained open, bleeding quietly in the dark. Inside me, something shifted. The trembling in my hands stilled. The heat on my face cooled into something sharper, colder. My eyes lifted, slow, deliberate. I looked at Charlotte again. She was radiant, basking in her triumph, her hand curled elegantly around Daniel's arm. The world applauded her, but my gaze cut through the shine. My humiliation solidified into something harder than shame. It calcified into resolve. They thought they had put me in my place. They thought I was the girl from childhood who handed over her future without protest. The girl who worked nights to fund Charlotte's dreams. The girl who smiled thinly while others took what they wanted. They thought I was still their ghost, their shadow, the invisible sister who swallowed pain until it hollowed her out. They thought wrong. Because I knew things. I knew secrets they prayed would stay buried. I knew what Daniel had done, the messes he had left behind. I knew the truth Charlotte had begged me never to repeat. I knew about debts, about mistakes, about betrayals whispered in dark corners. I knew things that could tear the veil off their perfect show, and in that moment, as laughter still lingered in the air, I realized the power I held. They thought they were laughing at someone powerless. But I wasn't. I was sitting on dynamite. All it would take was one spark, one slip of my tongue, one truth spoken aloud, and this perfect wedding would collapse into ash. I pressed the cool rim of the glass to my lips, sipping slowly, hiding the steadiness in my hand. My eyes never left hers. For the first time all night, I wasn't trembling. I wasn't small. I wasn't a ghost. I was dangerous. They didn't know. They didn't know I still had the texts Charlotte had sent me years ago, begging me to cover her tracks. They didn't know I had receipts, memories, proof of things she had buried. They didn't know I had seen Daniel with someone else, had overheard conversations he thought no one heard. They didn't know I was done playing my role. They thought I would keep sitting at the edge of their story, smiling thinly while they erased me. But I wasn't erasing myself anymore. I was writing something new. They thought I would let the humiliation end there. But I wasn't finished. They thought I was powerless. But they were wrong. Because the truth was coiled inside me like a blade, ready to slice open their performance. And when it did, nothing, no chandelier, no diamond ring, no white gown would save them from the fallout. They didn't know it yet, but I was holding secrets that could bury this wedding. For a moment, I thought about leaving. The humiliation still stung like a fresh wound, and the laughter echoed in my ears, even after the hall had quieted. My chair scraped faintly against the polished floor as I shifted, my body leaning forward, ready to stand. The thought of slipping away into the night, of vanishing before they had more chances to laugh, pressed against me like an exit door swinging open. If I left, the night would simply become another memory of me being small, forgotten, erased. But at least it would end. My hand moved toward my bag. That was when I felt it, my mother's stare. Across the room, she sat near Charlotte's table, her back straight, her chin lifted. Her eyes locked onto me, sharp and cutting, the same glare she had used on me since childhood, whenever I dared to step out of line. Her look was a warning, a command. Don't ruin this. Don't make this about you. I froze under it, the weight of decades pressing into my skin. The whispers started again, low, slippery, impossible to ignore. Guests leaned toward each other, murmuring behind raised hands. Some glanced at me, some smirked. The humiliation replayed itself in their whispers, stretching the moment until it felt unbearable. And then, from a few tables ahead, Claire tilted her phone deliberately, the glow of the screen lighting her face. She lifted it just enough for others to see. A new story was going live, a photo angled toward the head table, a caption sliding across it. Some people never learn how to take a joke. Her smile was smug as she tapped send. My body went cold. My humiliation wasn't just contained to this hall anymore. It was already leaking into the world outside. People watching from their homes, people scrolling through feeds would soon be laughing too. This wasn't just a wound. It was a broadcast. I turned back to my table. My wine glass sat before me, the surface trembling faintly with the hum of the room. I leaned forward, staring into the reflection. My face stared back, pale and tired, eyes wide with something between fear and fury. For years I had seen myself like this, small, invisible, erased. But tonight, staring into the dark mirror of the wine, I saw something else. A hardness I didn't recognize. A mouth that pressed into a thin line. A pair of eyes that weren't afraid anymore. My lips parted, and I whispered to my reflection, so quietly I almost couldn't hear it myself. Enough. The word tasted like metal. My heart pounded. Steady now, not panicked. My humiliation had burned itself clean, leaving something sharper. I didn't want to run anymore. I didn't want to hide. For years I had given everything, my education, my marriage, my sleep, my body to keep others afloat. And here I was, erased from the seating chart, erased from the photographs, erased from the story. Tonight I would not erase myself again. If you had been pushed this far, cornered in front of hundreds of people, whispered about, mocked, erased, would you still sit quietly? Would you smile thinly and pretend the knife hadn't landed? Or would you rise? Would you finally burn everything down? I pressed my fingertips against the base of the glass. Steady now. The air around me seemed clearer, colder. The laughter felt far away. The whispers dimmed. I had made my choice. They thought I would bow my head. They thought I would walk away silently, another ghost vanishing into the night. But they didn't know. And when they found out, it would already be too late. I stood, slow, deliberate, my chair scraping the floor like a warning bell. Heads turned, whispers sharpened. My mother's glare deepened, but I didn't flinch. My reflection in the glass lingered for just a second longer before I stepped forward, lips curled into the faintest, coldest smile. I chose not to leave. I chose something else. I chose what no one expected, and that choice was about to change everything. The music thinned to a nervous thread as my chair scraped the floor and every face angled toward me like I had broken a law simply by standing. I walked the aisle between tables drowned in chandelier, gold, past centerpieces crowned with white roses and guests who had just been laughing and were now pretending to be civilized. And I felt my own heartbeat steady the way a blade steadies in a sheath before it's drawn. Charlotte watched me approach with a bride's rigid poise, fingers perched on the rim of her flute, smile bright enough to blind, eyes sharp enough to cut. Daniel leaned back as if distance might make me smaller, and my mother arranged her mouth into that thin, punitive line I knew from childhood, the line that meant, "Don't you dare." I reached the unattended microphone and wrapped my hand around it. For a breath, the room held still like a photograph, and I let the quiet sit there, heavy, undeniable. "First of all," I said gently, "congratulations to Charlotte and Daniel," and her shoulders loosened a fraction as though the narrative were returning to script. "Marriage is beautiful," I added, "because it is built on honesty and trust and the holy inconvenience of knowing who stands beside you completely," and I paused long enough for the audience to nod. Then I changed my voice. "Today is not just a wedding," I said, shaping each syllable until it gleamed. "Today is the day of truth." Napkins stalled halfway to mouths. $1,000 of champagne hovered at a dozen lips. A small, confused ripple passed through the hall. I raised my free hand toward the AV booth. The lights dimmed a shade. The projector hummed awake. The white screen behind me went from harmless to surgical, and the first image landed with the dull thud of a gavel. Company letterhead, ledgers, red numbers crowding margins like warnings, an internal memo thread where the word investigation sat in the subject line like a siren. Gasps flickered. Someone hissed Daniel's name. The band kept stroking a nervous melody as if politeness could drown math. "Debts," I said evenly. "Losses. A pattern your new husband calls bad luck and his employer calls something else." Daniel shoved back his chair so hard the legs shrieked. "This is absurd," he said, and the microphone caught the crack in his voice. A woman at the front whispered, "No way." A man beside her said, "What is this?" And the MC raised a pacifying hand that hovered in the air like a flag without a country. "It's real," I answered, and I changed the slide. Text bubbles bloomed. Soft blues and grays everybody knows. Lines of flirtation and confession and carelessness, stepping down the screen with timestamps that refuse to lie. I kept names blurred, because recognition does not need letters when context does the carving. The bridesmaid in chiffon, the one who had purred in Charlotte's ear all morning, went utterly still. She read last night, she read soon. She read she doesn't know, and the room inhaled, like one animal suddenly aware of its own throat. Her chair scraped, her bouquet toppled and bruised against the floor. "I'm sorry," she said to no one, and she ran, heels punching the wood in a rhythm that sounded like an alarm. Daniel stared at the exit, and then at Charlotte, and then at me, his jaw working around a sentence that would not come. Charlotte held her smile in place the way a person holds a door shut against wind, but the hinges were complaining. I changed the slide again. The screen showed an old photograph of Charlotte younger and frightened and clinging to my arm in a bathroom lit by the kind of honesty that fluorescent bulbs force. Then came a neat parade of pay stubs with my name, bank transfers labeled tuition and textbooks, dates that braided perfectly with her announcements about scholarships she never won, receipts of nights I had peeled off my life and handed to her like spare skin. My mother's hand flew to her mouth and stayed there. People leaned forward as if gravity had changed. All this time, a guest whispered, "She told us she did it alone." Another muttered, "And I said she didn't." I did. I bought the bones of the future, underneath the lace you're applauding. Charlotte stood and found a second microphone and spoke like volume could rebuild a collapsing room. "You're humiliating yourself, Melissa. You're ruining my wedding because you are bitter and alone," and the speakers threw her tremor back at her twice as loud. "No," I said, "I am correcting the program." I told them I had worked doubles while she studied, that I had slid envelopes across a kitchen table while the world praised her discipline, that my name had been shaved from the story because shadows do not get credits, and I did not cry. I went back to numbers. The screen shifted to an email chain from Daniel's employer using words like irregularity and termination risk and repayment, and the hall listened the way a city listens to the approach of a siren. "Sit down," Daniel barked, and I said a tuxedo cannot launder a ledger, and debt has a smell, and we can all smell it now. "Jesus," someone near the band said. "Turn it off," another pleaded. I did not. "There are vows made under lights," I told them, "and vows made in rooms where nobody brings a ring. One of those vows is older than the other." The projector answered me with a hotel receipt, whose timestamp married too neatly to a message on the previous slide. The crowd, which had been clutching outrage like a tiny purse, opened it and found ash. A woman put a hand on Charlotte's shoulder and withdrew it as if the lace were hot. Charlotte turned to Daniel with the expression of someone discovering water on the floor and a broken ceiling above it. "You are a monster," she told me. But she looked at him, and her hand had curled so tight her diamonds bit her. "Monsters are often built from what families refuse to name," I replied. And I faced the hall not to beg, but to mark the coordinates of the harm. "For years," I said, "I labored in a story that would not give me a line. I emptied my pockets so she could fill her resume. I gave up my future so she could hang garlands over hers. And tonight she called me unwanted." I let the ugliness sit on the table with the cake forks until even the guests who had not laughed could taste it on their tongues. "If you had proof in your hands," I asked them, "if the truth sat in your palms like a live wire, would you take it into a closet and hope it cooled? Or would you throw the switch in a room like this and see what lights up? Would you stay seated because the florals are expensive and the photographer is on a schedule? Or would you stand because your name is worth more than someone else's comfort?" No one answered. The only sound was the soft fan of the projector and the band losing its place and finding a thinner melody. "You do not get to choose spectacle only when it flatters you," I said. "If a stage is used as a weapon for humiliation, a stage can carry the corrective." Silence settled with mass. In that wait, I felt the room slide into alignment like a picture that had hung crooked for years, finally nudged to level. I looked at Charlotte and saw not a queen but a costume. I looked at Daniel and saw not a husband but an alibi that would not hold. I looked at my mother and saw a map that refused to point where it used to. Phones rose like winter stars. A guest began filming without apology. Another stood as if to leave and then sat again, pulled back by the gravity of collapse. I lowered the microphone an inch and let the evidence glow behind me, like a choir that did not need voices. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then the room erupted. "No way!" someone shouted. "What is this?" another demanded. "You can't do this," the MC bleated, as if etiquette could reseal a floor already cracked. Chairs scraped, forks clattered, sentences collided. "How could you? Is it true? Turn it off. Keep going." Oh my God. My mother said my name once like a warning, and again like a prayer. The abandoned bouquet lay bruised against the edge of the stage. Daniel's jaw worked and failed. Charlotte said Melissa like it was both a curse and a spell to reverse an hour. And through it all, the chandelier trembled on its chain, crystals shivering, throwing fractured light onto a truth that would not go back to sleep. I looked at them all, the refusal, the fear, the rage, the spectators who had laughed, and the ones who had looked away, and I thought of years I had lost, and the seconds I had just reclaimed. I thought of Ethan's small hand, and the night he asked why his aunt did not like me, and how I had promised myself that someday my answer would be something better than silence. I felt the steadiness in my bones that comes when a story finally remembers its missing name. If you held proof like this, I asked once more, would you hide it to keep the party pretty, or would you lift it into the light and let it scorch the stage? Would you tell yourself you are unworthy of sound, or would you speak? I set the microphone gently back into the cradle so it barely clicked, and I let the screen burn with ledgers and messages and receipts until the images seared themselves into everyone who needed to remember. Then I gave the room the last truth it deserved. A single clean sentence to mark the point of no return. And I felt the floor of the night drop under their feet at the same time it rose under mine. And that was the moment hell officially opened. For a heartbeat, after the last word left my mouth, the ballroom froze as if the chandeliers themselves had stopped trembling, as if every fork and glass and breath had been trapped in ice. The projector hummed softly behind me, its light bleaching the evidence across the wall like judgment, and in that silence the truth pressed down heavier than any music could. Then it cracked. Daniel was the first. His chair screeched across the polished floor, toppling backward with a clatter that ricocheted through the cavernous hall. "This is garbage," he barked, his face swollen red, his collar damp with sweat. He slammed his fists onto the table so hard the crystal rattled. "These are lies fabricated. She's insane." But his voice betrayed him, breaking high, frantic, desperate. He glanced once at the glowing screen, at the ledgers and emails spelled in black and white, and in that glance the guest saw the truth. Guilt. Without another word, he shoved his way through the tables, nearly knocking over a waiter, and stormed for the exit. The double doors banged shut behind him, with a sound that silenced even the whispers. The groom was gone. Charlotte's composure cracked like porcelain under a hammer. She stood slowly, as though trying to salvage dignity, but her knees buckled halfway, and she clutched the edge of the head table. "Melissa," she gasped, voice raw, "you've ruined everything." Her microphone slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a metallic bang that echoed too loud in the stillness. Her mascara streaked, black lines crawling down her cheeks like a map of everything she had lost in seconds. "This was my day," she cried, spinning in circles as though someone might reach out and hold her upright, but no one moved. Instead, phones rose like 100 glittering eyes, their screens glowing, their cameras aimed not at flowers or cake or champagne but at her collapse. The guests, who only moments ago toasted her radiance, now dissected her ruin in whispers. "Oh my God, it's live already," someone muttered. Another leaned close to their partner. "She lied about everything. Her school, her success, all of it." A man near the bar smirked, holding his phone steady. "This is going viral in minutes." My mother surged to her feet, fury propelling her across the floor. She seized my wrist, her nails biting deep. "Melissa!" she hissed, her face ghostly pale, her eyes wide with panic. "Stop this madness. You are tearing this family apart." I looked down at her hand, at the same grip that had yanked me into line my entire childhood. And then I peeled her fingers off one by one. "No," I said softly, coldly. "I am not tearing anything apart. I am just showing what was already broken." She recoiled as though struck, and for the first time in my life, my mother had no reply. The waitstaff lingered at the edges, trays in hand, frozen between duty and disaster. One young server whispered to another, Do we keep serving?" The answer never came. Plates of untouched cake sat sweating on silver stands, meaningless now. The flower girls clung to their mothers' skirts, crying, confused why the bride was no longer a princess, but a screaming stranger. The band had already stopped, instruments drooping in their hands, their last cheerful notes still clinging faintly to the walls. Charlotte collapsed fully now, her knees hitting the dance floor, her veil slipping sideways to expose tangled hair. "You're jealous," she sobbed, stabbing a finger at me, her voice torn raw. "You've always been jealous. You couldn't stand to see me happy." Her words came louder, shriller, desperate. "I worked for this life. I earned it. You—" But her voice drowned beneath the crowd, because the whispers had transformed. They weren't sympathy. They weren't defense. They were disbelief turning to condemnation. "She took her sister's money," a woman murmured. "Her whole story is a lie," a man said bitterly. "And that groom he ran because it's true," another added. The voices braided together until they were louder than Charlotte's sobs, a chorus of judgment she could not outshout. The chandelier above swayed, as though unsettled by the energy in the room. Candles guttered in their holders, wax dripping onto white linens, now stained with spilled wine. Chairs scraped and toppled as guests half stood, debating whether to leave or keep watching. Some huddled together, narrating every second into their phones for invisible audiences outside the walls. The wedding, once curated to perfection, had become a spectacle of ruin that strangers scrolling on couches would soon devour. Charlotte tried to reclaim them, raising her arms as if pleading for mercy. "It's not true!" she screamed. "She's lying. She's bitter." But her words were weak against the glow of the evidence, still plastered on the screen behind me, the receipts and stubs and messages that did not tremble when spoken aloud. Truth had weight. Her denial had none. She crawled toward our mother, clutching at her dress like a drowning child reaching for shore. "Make her stop," she begged, her voice breaking. "Mom, please." But our mother only shook her head slowly, her hands trembling, eyes downcast. For the first time, even she could not protect her princess. That silence was louder than any condemnation. Around us, the feast disintegrated, plates abandoned, forks clattering, champagne flat in glasses no one raised anymore. Guests streamed toward the exits, some muttering excuses, others filming to the very last moment. A handful stayed, transfixed, unable to look away from the slow-motion wreck of a queen dethroned. And me? I stood still, calm, my glass still cool in my hand. The chaos swirled around me like a storm, but I was its eye, untouched, watching the destruction I had unleashed with something close to serenity. For the first time in years, I was not the one shrinking under laughter. I was not the one being erased. I was the one writing the narrative. Charlotte lay collapsed on the floor, her dress pooled around her like melting snow, her sobs swallowed by the relentless hum of phones recording. Tomorrow, maybe sooner, she would be everywhere, not as a radiant bride, but as a viral lesson in the fragility of perfection. The world would not remember her vows. It would remember her ruin. My mother finally sat down, her hands limp in her lap. She would not meet my eyes, nor Charlotte's. She stared at the tablecloth as if searching for a future that had evaporated. The servers whispered again, "Should we clear?" No, wait. The cake tower leaned untouched, sugar roses wilting, a monument to a day that had ended long before dessert. The wedding was over, the illusion was shattered, and what remained was only the raw noise of collapse, the spectacle of a kingdom devouring itself. The night didn't end when the last guest slipped out of the hall. It didn't end when the band packed their instruments in silence, or when the servers scraped ruined food into bins, or even when Charlotte's sobs echoed down the empty corridors of a hotel she had rented to crown herself queen. No, the night was only beginning, because while her empire crumbled inside four gilded walls, outside, the world had already started watching. By the time I reached home, still in my plain dress, Ethan already asleep in his small bed, the internet had swallowed the wedding whole. Clips shot from shaky phones blazed across feeds. Bride's sister exposes groom's secrets live on stage. Perfect wedding turns into family scandal. The words scrolled endlessly, attached to videos of Charlotte's face streaked with mascara, of Daniel storming out, of me standing at the microphone with a glass in hand, my voice steady while hers broke. Comments multiplied faster than I could read. Some hailed me as a hero. Finally, someone stood up to toxic family lies. Others called me cruel. She destroyed her sister's wedding out of jealousy. Strangers debated my life as though they'd been there since childhood, building theories about who I was, who Charlotte was, what Daniel had done. My name, our names, trended. My phone buzzed until the battery died. I didn't answer a single call. I sat at the kitchen table in the half-dark, listening to the tick of the old wall clock, staring at the shadows on the floor. The chaos was no longer mine to manage. It belonged to the internet now, to the millions of eyes who would feast on it until something fresher arrived. Charlotte tried to fight back. By morning she had posted a statement dripping with denial, calling me unstable, calling the evidence fabricated. But denial couldn't erase what hundreds of guests had already seen with their own eyes, what dozens of videos had already carried into the world. Every repost was a nail hammered into the coffin of her fairy tale. Every meme carved her down to a cautionary tale. My mother called once, twice, then stopped. I imagined her sitting in her kitchen, blinds drawn, phone silent, the weight of silence pressing heavier than anger. She had always chosen Charlotte, always crowned her the princess, always told me to endure. Now the world had seen the crown slip. What was left for her to say? But the internet didn't stay outside my walls. It seeped in through the glow of screens, through the whispers of neighbors, through the way strangers looked at me differently in the grocery store. Some nodded with admiration, others turned away. I had become a symbol, and symbols are always simplified, flattened. No one saw the years behind my decision, the bones I'd broken to hold everyone else up. They only saw the moment the dam burst. Ethan woke the next morning like any child, rubbing his eyes, dragging his blanket behind him. He found me at the table, still in last night's dress, coffee cold in front of me. "Mom," he said softly, "why is everyone talking about you on the computer?" The question pierced sharper than Charlotte's insult. I turned to him, my throat tight. "What do you mean?" I asked. He shrugged, innocence carved across his small face. "I saw on the phone my friends' moms were watching a video. You were in it. They said you made Aunt Charlotte cry." I swallowed, hard, staring at the boy who had once asked me why his aunt didn't like me. I wanted to protect him from the noise, from the swarm of strangers tearing apart our lives for sport. But I couldn't lie. Not anymore. I pulled him close, pressing his head against my shoulder. "Sometimes," I whispered, "telling the truth makes people cry. But that doesn't mean it was wrong." He thought about that for a moment, his brow furrowed, then nodded slowly. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said simply, and wandered off to find his toys. My eyes burned, not with humiliation this time, but with something cleaner, something almost like relief. The internet would keep feeding. Charlotte would keep screaming. My mother would keep silent. The story would twist in the mouths of strangers until even I barely recognized it. But Ethan's voice cut through it all, anchoring me to the only truth that mattered. I hadn't destroyed myself. I had finally refused to disappear. And in that refusal, a new kind of chaos had been born, one that no chandelier, no dress, no crown of flowers could contain. If you're still here with me, you've seen how one night, one truth, can rewrite an entire story. My sister thought she owned the spotlight, that lies could be dressed in silk and passed off as destiny. But lies always leak, they stain, and eventually the world sees. I won't tell you revenge is sweet, because it isn't. It burns, It leaves smoke in your lungs, and you never walk away clean. But sometimes, silence is worse. Sometimes the only way to survive is to stop swallowing what poisons you and finally let it spill. What did I learn? That family can wound deeper than any enemy, but it doesn't mean their version of you is the truth. That your sacrifices, no matter how invisible, shape more than you know. And that dignity isn't about being loved or chosen, it's about standing up, even when your knees shake, about naming what was stolen from you and daring to take it back. So if you've been erased, if you've been laughed at, if your story has been written by someone else's hands, remember, you are not powerless. You are the author. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is pick up the pen. Now I want to ask you, if you were in my place, would you have stayed quiet for the sake of peace? Or would you have exposed everything, no matter the cost? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And before you go, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more revenge stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Because when silence ends, the real story begins.